Joining me on my webinar today. This looks like a very popular topic as nearly 500 school leaders have registered for this webinar, and I know that several are still joining in at this moment, and grateful that you've chosen to spend a little bit of time with me on this Thursday, or perhaps you're going to be watching the recording at some point in the future. I know that's how a lot of people do webinars these days. You have a busy schedule and you'll get to it when you can. So again, this is a very popular topic on how to stop attrition in its tracks at your school. So hopefully I'll provide you with all the answers and solutions that you need to be able to move forward. And we're going to look at why parent satisfaction, leadership, and the everyday experience drives retention in your school. Now, let me just give you a little bit of an introduction here for those of you who may not know me as well. I've been working with schools, helping them with their enrollment and marketing effort for over 15 years. And I've had the opportunity to partner with well over 500 schools. In fact, my last count is that I've worked with schools in 46 different states in the US, but I've also worked with schools outside of the US, including Canada, been to Jamaica, Australia. So lots of great opportunities to be able to partner with schools, even worldwide. And so appreciate my reach and the opportunity to be able to connect with schools in an online format. That's one thing that COVID taught us, is that we can reach out and connect with anybody around the world. So my main focus is to partner with schools through my Enrollment Catalyst program. I am famous for my selfies. When I'm ever on a site visit, I take a selfie with the team. In fact, this week, of all places, I was in Palm Springs, California. Beautiful weather, and had a great time at Xavier College Preparatory High School. You see the picture there, second row, second picture in. I'm working with the team there, was there for a couple days, and so great opportunity to assess their enrollment and marketing processes and strategies, and I'll be putting together a comprehensive set of recommendations to be able to move their school forward. So my travels take me all over the map, and I enjoy being able to go to schools, even if you're in a colder climate. I know a lot of you have been hit with snow and ice storms recently. I'm originally from Michigan, so I put in my time in the cold and snow. My wife and I now live in Florida during the winter months, and so, but it's a little chilly actually here in St. Petersburg, Florida. In fact, I was hearing a little report that there may be some snow flurries this weekend. We'll see if that's really true. I have never seen snow in Florida, at least where we live. We're living here in the last 25 years. So, but it's great to work with schools. I love working alongside of a school team to get to know them, to understand their challenges and questions and the direction that they want to go in to achieve their goals. One of the other areas that I'm involved in is connecting with Andy Lynch, who is the president and owner of Tassel Marketing. And he and I team up as the Enrollment Marketing Geeks. And we have a show and tell show. It's modeled after show and tell in kindergarten or first grade, where you brought in your tooth that you lost the night before and you show that off to everyone in your class. And so what we do is we focus in on strategies and all kinds of areas that schools are excelling in. We have lots of conversations. We have 4 upcoming show and tell shows that you're seeing here on the screen. And so I would encourage you to watch these. You can either watch them live or you can tune in and watch the recording. The QR code will take you to the screen on our Enrollment Marketing Geeks website, and you can access and register for any of these show and tell shows that interest you. We also have about 23, I think, that we've recorded, and we've actually done live, and they've been recorded. They're available on the website as well. So if you're interested in a particular topic, in fact, we have done a couple of shows on retention. So you may be interested in going back and watching some of those shows. We always want to stay in front of schools and highlight some of the great things that you all are doing. So actually, if any of you have any ideas for a future show and tell show, if there's something you're doing that's worth showing off, let us know, or let me know, and I'd love to feature you in an upcoming show just like we're doing here in the upcoming future on some of these key topics here. Next week, I'm going to be announcing my AI Catalyst training program. So I've been spending a lot of time and using and understanding AI and how that will apply to the admissions and marketing world. And so I'm going to be offering a training program that will be online, and you can watch live or you can tune into the recording, and you'll be able to learn how to maximize the use of ChatGPT. Ultimately, it's about designing some custom GPTs that'll do specific tasks for you that you're doing over and over again. And I'll teach you how to train ChatGPT on your school's brand, so it's speaking from your school's voice. So it's really exciting to be able to offer this. Stay tuned. You'll hear about this early next week as I announce this to the world. So hopefully some of you will choose to be a part of this as I lead this training online, because it's really a great tool that you can use. So today's topic is about how we can stop attrition in its tracks at your school. So, we're going to discuss a lot of key areas, and I've been studying retention for years, back to my university days, as well as my own experience as a head of school to well over 500 plus experiences in schools all over. So, we're going to look at some issues related to attrition. We're going to talk about some retention myths. We're going to spend some time understanding parent satisfaction and parent confidence, which is really a key point that I hope to drive home during this webinar. We're going to discuss who owns retention within your school, and then talk about 5 retention levers that you can pull that will help you focus in on the issues of attrition that you're finding within your school community. So let's jump in. This conversation, I think, is very important, because as I talk to schools and work with schools all over, there's certainly some enrollment pressure. It's rising. We're long gone are those COVID surge days where, we had people just knocking at our doors because we were open and they wanted to find a great school for their kids. And so some schools certainly are thriving and they're full, but I've been seeing some schools that are struggling, that have been experiencing some decline, and the pressure certainly is there. And some of it centers around attrition, because you look at attrition and how important this topic is. Replacing those families is costly, and so it takes a lot more money to go out and recruit a brand new family to your school, and your culture is at stake as well. So you look at your school community, your environment. Attrition is not only going to affect revenue, because you're going to lose that revenue, that family coming in. It's going to affect morale. People are going to start questioning. There's going to be concerns about confidence in your school community. What's going on? Why are these people leaving? What's happening? It's going to create this potential negative word of mouth within the community. And so this conversation is very important as we think about how we can stop attrition in its tracks. So a couple of things in the beginning here, what this webinar is and is not. So I don't know what you were hoping for, but I want to set the expectations here in the beginning. So the webinar is really more leadership focused, looking at strategic decisions that matter and make a difference, strategy driven, more so with systems rather than specific tactics, and experience centered, what families are actually feeling and going through. It's not necessarily about admissions training or a list of keys, the top 10 strategies that you can put in place that are going to make the difference in keeping your families enrolled. And we'll talk more about that and why I've chosen to go in this direction. And in a way, it's not about doing a whole lot more. It's about actually redefining what we're looking at and focusing in on what we can do as a leadership team to be able to stop attrition. Not that we'll ever totally be able to stop it. So I've never found a school that has 100% retention. The highest I've ever worked with was a school that had 98% retention. And so the excellent school, and so everything was cranking in all cylinders. I always say that if you can be 90% or higher, then that's the mark of a great school. And certainly this is no magic wand. I'm not gonna, solve your problems and fix your attrition issues in one magic wave of the wand. There's no such thing. It's always going to be a comprehensive set of solutions, tactics, strategies, perspectives, philosophies that we're working on to really deal with attrition within our school. So I want to just make that clear to you. I can't give you, a list of these 5 things that if you just do these things, it's going to solve the issues of attrition in your school. That's not how it works. So we'll talk more about that as we move forward. So let's actually start with a little poll here. And through the platform that I'm using is GoToWebinar, I can put a poll up on the screen. And so I'm going to do that here. What do you believe, or when do you believe most re-enrollment decisions are actually made? So let me see if I can get this to show on the screen here. You should actually see this poll. And I'd like for you to just select, we're just going to spend the next 30 seconds. You have an opportunity to be able to select when you think the re-enrollment decisions are actually made. Is it at re-enrollment, a few months before, gradually throughout the year, or maybe you're not sure? So give you 15 more seconds. Looks like a number of you have already selected and your option here. And so let's see what you all have identified. I'm going to share the results on the screen, and you can see that only 1% of you selected at re-enrollment, which is good. Hopefully you read my last blog post. 23% said a few months before, 75% said gradually throughout the year, and then 1% not sure. So we actually agree on this, which is great. And so that's very positive that we're in sync here, because what we find is that re-enrollment decisions aren't just made at the time of re-enrollment. It actually takes place well before that. The reality is that schools don't lose families at re-enrollment. That's really the time frame that forces the issue. They lose families through the everyday experiences within your school. And that's the key concept that I really want to drive home in this webinar with all of us today as we focus in on this. It's really a core idea for us to understand that it's about the everyday experiences in your school. In other words, it's less to do about re-enrollment, and it's more to deal with what happens day in and day out within your school community. I know some of you have continuous enrollment in place, and I'm an advocate for that strategy. That is potentially a core strategy that I would encourage the school to be able to put in place, because it changes the messaging. So whether you're using re-enrollment or continuous enrollment, you still have a process where either they need to sign up or opt out for the next year. But in a way, those strategies don't have much of an impact upon whether they're coming back. It's truly about the everyday experiences at the school. And so re-enrollment is going to actually reveal the decision that the family is making. It's not going to create the decision, because everything that they've experienced up until that point is going to lead to the actual decision that's made. And so that's important to be able to think about that, as we consider attrition and this topic. For us, it's going to reveal that decision. Re-enrollment is the receipt. It's not the actual cause of why they're choosing not to come back. So, and by the time families get to that re-enrollment period, their confidence in where the school is at and where it's headed in the future is going to drive that decision that they ultimately make at that time. So this really helps us to reframe where we need to focus our efforts as we think about this issue of retention. So let's consider why attrition persists. Most schools don't struggle with retention because they don't care. I mean, you wouldn't be on this webinar today if you didn't care about this topic. And that's obvious in the amount of school leaders that chose to sign up for this particular webinar. It's because you care. You're concerned. You're concerned about attrition. You want to do what you can do to be able to address this issue. The issue, though, is that you struggle to believe the wrong things about what drives families to stay or leave. And so it's important that we understand, the decision that families are making within their school and what leads up to that. Because, for some schools, attrition is an issue. And I've worked in plenty of schools where that's been a concern, where we've had to really tackle specific issues related to attrition. And so that's where we have to dive in and understand. But it's important for us to understand what's driving those decisions that parents are making. So let's look at some retention myths that actually hold some schools back. And I want to highlight for you a few of these, because what they do is they potentially delay our leadership action. They may feel logical to us, but it's perhaps a misled strategy. And I see these myths in all different types of schools that I work with, from very small to very large to everything in between. I've had the opportunity to work with not only different sizes of schools, but different school types. So the first one, if families are unhappy, they'll tell us. Now, certainly the loud and vocal ones will. They'll show up in our office. They'll find us in the parking lot. They may shout out to us online, whatever. But I don't know that there's, that most of them, though, are going to tend to stay silent. There might be little glimpses that you can see along the way, but there's a silence that's happening. They may not be in your office to confront what they feel like is wrong or an issue. They may not be conveying their unhappiness at the school. There's people out there that we don't have connections with, and their silence would tend to lead us towards thinking about, well, if they're not saying anything, they must be happy. But then what happens is they might quietly leave. So that's an important myth to be able to consider. If families aren't happy, they're going to tell us not necessarily the case. Myth number 2, retention is mainly an admissions responsibility. So think about your admissions director at your school, or maybe you're the admissions director or enrollment director. Is retention in your job description? Do you own retention? That doesn't work from my perspective. I don't believe that retention is an admissions responsibility, because what is admissions focusing on? Bringing in new families to the school. Who should be involved in owning retention? Really, it's everybody else, and we'll talk about that, in a little bit from here. But retention, in terms of the admissions focus, truly could just be about the re-enrollment or continuous enrollment process and the communication that goes around it. The admissions office can't own the retention strategies, or they could, but I would suggest that that's not the appropriate place for them, because it's the principals, it's the leadership that are the ones involved day to day leading what happens in the school. So as you think about that job description for your admissions or enrollment director, where does admissions reside? Where does retention reside? Whose responsibility is it? If it's allocated to that individual running that department, it's misplaced. So myth number 3, programs guarantee retention. Not necessarily. Just because you add a new program, it has to be done with quality, with excellence. You have to have the right people leading that program. I mean, just because you maybe add a football program or you add a STEM program within your school, it doesn't necessarily going to guarantee that you're going to retain those families. It has to be the parents' confidence in those programs that you're going to deliver on it, that you're going to have the best coaches, that you're going to have the best faculty, that you're going to provide innovative types of educational experiences. So you have to be careful of just adding a bunch of programs that's going to lead towards increased retention within your school. Myth number 4, attrition happens suddenly. Well, it can. Certainly there can be an incident that occurs within a school that leads a parent to choose not to continue. But honestly, attrition seems to be slow, quiet. In some ways it's predictable, because if you know what you're looking for, you can potentially see it. Things like, are they disconnected from the community at your school? Are they not paying their tuition bill on time? Are they disgruntled in some areas? You just hear little snippets. Maybe the child is not connected with friendships. I mean, all those types of factors can lead to a family choosing to leave the school. So it can be slow and quiet, along the way, and it's usually not going to be this drastic, sudden thing that happens. Although I've seen that in schools where, I've seen that in fact in some schools that I've worked with recently. The principal gets fired in the middle of the school year, and parents were connected to that leadership, to that person, and so they get concerned about where's the school headed in the future, and they decide it's not worth staying. Their confidence is shattered, and they choose to go elsewhere because of it. Myth number 5: better retention strategies can change parent values. Here's an important one. As you think about it, every family within your school has a certain set of values. What do they really want to see happen in the life of their kids? Maybe a parent is highly focused in on athletics. That is their value. That's their driver. Everything in their life is football. They want their child to be that football star. And so you have a football program that is mediocre. And so there's almost nothing that you can do to try to convince that family to stay, because they want the better program, at the local public high school. So you can't change their values. Now we can inform them, we can communicate, we can tell stories, we can do all those types of things. But if my value is that, or let's say the value is, hey, I went to a large public school for high school, and I like all those opportunities. I want to make sure that my child has the same opportunity. So I believe and I value that bigger is better. If that's my value, it's going to be hard to change that. So we can work on better communication, better promotion, telling the story about our experiences and how it can make a difference. But ultimately, if that's the value that's driving that family, they're not going to choose to stay. And you can think about all the different types of values that may be the case or represented in your parent community. So, retention strategies are going to protect those aligned families that have the same values for who you are and what you're offering. It's not going to necessarily convert those that are misaligned. I've seen this in some schools that go through 8th grade, for example. And so as the parent approaches those middle school years, they may have the perceived value that other schools in the community are better, or they want to get a jump start on high school by moving to that school for middle school. That's their value. So you can't change that, but you can work towards, again, better communication, better internal marketing, better promotion. But ultimately, if that's the value that's driving the family, it's going to be frustrating for you because those parents are going to continue to leave. So here's the retention truth. Families stay when they're confident in the value that they receive. Retention is a result of confidence, not necessarily in our persuasion tactics of what we could do to try to convince a family to stay in our school. So confidence is a key term that I'm focusing in on this webinar, and it's an important one to consider because I've never actually heard anyone talk about this in retention presentations or resources that I've seen or read over the years, and I believe it's probably one of the most important ones. So let's take a look at parent satisfaction and parent confidence because they're related. Parent satisfaction is more about how the parent feels right now. So like, for example, it's important to understand, are they satisfied with their kids' classes, with their teachers? When you take a satisfaction survey, how are they identifying how they feel about the school experience? Confidence, though, is about how the parents believe in what will happen next. Do they have the confidence? Do they believe that you're actually going to provide the best education for their son or daughter? Do they have the confidence that this is the best environment for them? So all those things are very, very important for us. So I think it comes down to parent confidence and trying to understand, and I think what the parent is considering is that, they want to know that my child is in the right school and the school is going to deliver on what it promises. So leadership is key to this, confidence in the school leadership and where it's headed, the teaching and care, what happens on a daily basis within the school, the belonging, are they connected? Are they part of the social group? Are they part of a team? And, are we delivering on what we're promising? So if they have the confidence in these areas, this is where they're going to be most likely to stay in your school. So parents' confidence, there's 3 key beliefs. It's about the fit. A parent is thinking about how their child fits within your school. Do they belong here? Are they meeting my son or daughter's needs academically, socially, emotionally, spiritually? Think about all the different ways that we connect with kids. Is my child actually a fit here? Do they value? Will my child what my child receives, does it match or exceed what we expected? Is there that value there in terms of what they're receiving? And what about trust? Trust is important. Do I trust these people who are educating my child? I know that things will go wrong, but what happens when things go wrong? How will they respond? Is it something they're just gonna, dust under the carpet and not really pay attention to it or deal with it? When that happens, then that trust is broken and there's not going to be the confidence in your school to be able to continue. So parent confidence is very, very key. And so let's look at the satisfaction equation. So the perceived value of the school experience is really related in the everyday experience. What a parent values, it's basically based upon what happens every day in the life of that school. And you multiply that by the trust in leadership. Again, do I trust these people that I'm paying money for? Do I trust the leadership that they're going to continue to take the school in the right direction? When that trust is broken, that's going to have an effect on everyday experiences, and you're going to see, that value plummet along the way. So the satisfaction equation is very, very important for us to consider, because this is what parents are thinking about. They're looking at every single day in the experience in the school, and do we actually trust the people who are there providing this influence on my child? So some early warning signs that you can see that would signal that a family's confidence may be slipping. They might have increased questioning. So you're seeing that from them based upon how they're coming at you, or the questions that they have about whatever it may be within the school. Maybe they're doing some comparison shopping, and that word gets out. Maybe their child is gone for a day because they're shadowing at another school. Maybe you get a records request, and so you know a little bit more about their child or their families looking elsewhere. Maybe they're pulling back from their involvement within your community. They just don't seem to be engaged. Or maybe they're just hesitating, and that's how that's coming out in the vocabulary. What they're saying is that we're not sure anymore. So you can hear that word out on the street within your school community, and those create early warning signs. So some critical terms to consider as we think about this whole topic of trying to stop attrition in its tracks. Retention is where we are going to measure the outcome. That's families who are returning. Re-enrollment is the decision point. It's when we force them into making a decision, whether it's re-enrollment, you have to opt in, or continuous enrollment. There's still an opt-out period where you're choosing to tell us you're not coming back, otherwise you're continually enrolled. But it's re-recruitment that is so important. That's the year-round leadership effort that we're focusing on building confidence in the school and the programs and the people on a daily basis. That's honestly what matters most within the school community and matters most about impacting this topic of attrition. Because retention isn't a season, it's actually a discipline, something that we're focusing in on over and over again. So if your leadership team, for example, is sitting around talking about some retention tactics, which are important to consider, but it's not the only thing, then you're kind of missing the boat, because you need to be thinking about how you're interacting with families, how you're building their confidence, how you're delivering on what you're promising. And that's really the everyday experience. The everyday experience at your school is what makes a difference in whether a parent stays and pays. So you look at what happens in the classroom. Is there consistency? Is there quality? You know, I see this all the time where you have a bad hire for third grade, and so it doesn't go well in that class, and so that's gonna affect the parent's confidence. Now, if they see that over and over again, they're out of there, you know, because they don't have the confidence in you as leaders to be able to provide the best educators. So there's no retention strategy that's going to fix that. It's honestly about hiring the best people and making sure that you're delivering on excellence and consistency and quality. It's about the opportunities that you're providing, you know, and the co-curriculum, you know, thinking about athletics and fine arts and all the other programs. It's how you're communicating, what you're sharing. It's being responsive to parent concerns as they surface. It's how you're resolving those issues, or maybe even ignoring them. I mean, that goes a long way. If you never get back to parents, and I've seen that in schools where, you know, parents express their concerns, they never hear back from the teacher or the administrator. That's not going to go well. Or the transitions between grades and divisions. So where schools actually lose families is you're not going to lose them necessarily in one particular moment. It's usually through patterns and experiences along the way that are accumulated that chip away at their confidence week after week. Now, I do know that there's situations that happen. You know, I've seen this recently. A football coach, you know, decided to leave and go to another school. So that resulted in a number of students moving because they were loyal to that football coach. So you're going to have situations like that where you may have a moment that chooses or causes families to leave, but they probably weren't bought in from the beginning anyway. They didn't value what you were offering. So it's important to think about this because, you know, we lose families over time. It's about that everyday experience. It's those small moments, you know, have those big influence. I mean, think about, you know, this example. A parent calls with a concern about their fourth grader. You know, the front office says the teacher will get back to them, and it just ends up being in this black hole of teacher communication. You know, days pass, there's no response. Let's face it, we have inconsistencies in how our faculty respond to parents. And so that needs to be an expectation. And we also need to provide accountability for how we're responding to parents. And see, what happens when a situation like this occurs is that the parents are going to tell other parents. And so, you know, the concern maybe wasn't that big. It should have been dealt with, but the silence in our response, that's where things escalate. So those small breakdowns will compound, and, you know, the patterns will create perceptions in their minds along the way. And so you think about what we invest in. And so it's things like marketing campaigns, which I'm an advocate for, and admissions processes, do that all the time, day and night, you know, developing programs, enhancing our facilities. But how often are we thinking about, you know, the experience, or the faculty and the staff, or the parent confidence and the communication? Those in a way can be underestimated, and those are very, very important to us because that establishes the culture, the community that we have within our school environment. I mean, think about the Tuesday test. It could be any day of the week, but I chose Tuesday. So there's no significance to Tuesday, but it represents the everyday experience. So what does that average parent experience on a regular Tuesday? You know, they drive their kid to school. There's car line. What's car line look like? Are they greeted? And they drop them off. The kid goes to class. Maybe they get communication, or maybe they don't, from the teacher. Maybe there's an issue at school with their child. The child comes home crying after school. You know, you never know what's going to happen on a normal day, but, you know, that's a regular day. It's not the big open house, you know, where we're putting our best show on. It's not the gala. It's just Tuesday. It's just an everyday in our school. Honestly, that's where retention is won or lost. It's not necessarily in the big program that we put together to focus in on highlighting the transition from 5th to 6th grade or 8th to 9th, even though those are important. It's really what happens every day, day in and day out within your school community. And so as you think about retention, it's important to consider leading versus lagging indicators. So the retention rate itself is actually a lagging indicator. It's lagging because it's telling you what's already happened. It doesn't explain why the family's left. It's really too late. If you're waiting for re-enrollment to launch your retention strategies per se, you waited way too late in the process. So, and if you look at your retention rates, and that's your first signal that you have an issue, you're already too late in the process. So as you look at these leading and lagging indicators, the lagging one obviously is the retention rate, but the leading indicators are what's happening all leading up to that. That's why it's called leading indicators. Makes sense, right? It's parent satisfaction trends. What's happening? Are the parents happy with our programs? Are they satisfied? Are they content? What about your net promoter score? I'm a huge advocate of measuring your net promoter score, which is an indication of the strength of your school's word of mouth. If they're not willing to talk about your school to a friend, they probably have some issue that's going on that's affecting their overall perspective of their experience. How you respond, your transition grade confidence that they have, the leadership visibility levels. You can think about all the different leading indicators. And so why that distinction matters. And so if you're waiting for the retention data, that's going to put you behind. You need to be looking at those leading indicators all along the way. And so that's where we have to be able to focus in on these issues and topics, well before the re-enrollment process starts. So who owns retention? Let's do this poll as well. Let me pull up this one here, and I'm going to share this one on the screen and give you a chance to respond. So you probably already know my perspective, but think about your school right now. Who owns retention within your school community? It's very, very important to think about how it's structured at this point. So I'll give you about another 15, 20 seconds to be able to complete this poll, and then I'll share it on the screen for you to be able to look at. So actually, I'm encouraged here. This is looking positive from what you all are sharing. Give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, close the poll, share the results here. And 7% of you said admissions. So you know where I stand on that. And then 2% said it's the head of school, the principal. 79% said it's a shared leadership team. That's great. I love how you are responding here. I just want to make sure that that's actually truly what's happening, that you have ownership in these strategies. 12% of you said it's not clearly defined. So you have an opportunity to be able to look at that and clearly making that, that decision as in terms of how you would be highlighting and sharing who is the one who is responsible for retention within your school. So let me hide the results here and go back to the presentation. So I believe that leadership owns retention. So for the most part, you all agree with me. So that's great. I'm not sharing rocket science with you. Hopefully this is something that you know and embrace, but you're understanding it from this global perspective. Again, I talked about this earlier, retention supports retention. They can support it with continuous enrollment or re-enrollment process. Maybe they can help with some of the transition grade level strategies, but the faculty are the ones who deliver the everyday experience. That's truly, how or what's going to affect whether a parent's staying within your school community. And then you see that leadership is the one who really owns that confidence, owns the parent confidence, and retention will follow based upon your decisions, visibility, and accountability. So you think about leadership owning retention, you have the most control over the culture, the accountability, who's doing what, the alignment, expectations, the communication. All this is very, very important, in this process. So as you think about who owns retention, think about leading all these areas. I remember working with a school years ago out on the West Coast, and as I was working through my Enrollment Catalyst program, we identified that retention needed to be an issue of priority. And so rather than giving that to the enrollment director at the time to lead, the head of school took on that responsibility. And actually, the head of school provided accountability for each one of his principals. He said to them, you're going to be responsible for retention within your area, your sphere of influence. I'm going to provide accountability for how you're doing and what you're doing, what the rates are, what the parent issues are, how you're addressing them. And so it was a great way for the leadership to be directly involved in providing that accountability and ownership of retention. So doing more with retention is not necessarily the strategy. Again, it's not a list of 10 things that you need to implement that's going to make a difference in keeping more families enrolled in your school. But it's doing the right things. It's continually trying to enhance your school. It's being intentional about that. It's being consistent along the way. So every retention strategy, I think, must answer 3 key questions. In other words, where are we most vulnerable? Looking at our school, where are vulnerabilities here? What are our risk zones? Are they specific grades? Are they transitions that happen? I've worked with several schools where the issue has been focused in on 8th to 9th grade. And so I've done some extensive research. In fact, in some of these schools, I've done middle school parent and student surveys to identify their thoughts and perspectives on continuing for high school, even looking at who's the decision maker and what the factors are that will influence their decision. Because it leads us to this number 2 question, why are the families at risk? We have to understand those root causes. And so through surveys, through focus groups, you're able to understand them. I've been working with one school on this issue for several years now, and every year we do the same set of middle school parent and student surveys to get their perspectives on their plans for high school. And we do that in October. That's an example of a specific tactic that's informing us about the root causes and issues. And then you think about, what do we need to do? What we must change, in the overall experience at the school. So that's going to help lead us to determine the changes that we need to make. So it could be little things, could be big things. It could be personnel, it could be programs. It could be a lot of things. So the risk zones, are in your transition grades. That's obvious. Typically, I see that between pre-K and K, 5th and 6th, 8th and 9th. Continually see that over and over again. Maybe there's visibility gaps, where the heads, the leaders aren't available or aren't interacting with parents. I've actually worked with some schools where the head of school hasn't really been connecting with parents. And so that's a misstep. When the head of school, the leader, is not connecting with the key constituency on a regular basis. Maybe there's inconsistencies in communication, in terms of how we're communicating or what we're communicating, and there's expectations that are misaligned along the way. So when you think about our transition grades, that's where parents begin to question, that confidence may drop when the expectations shift along the way. There may be some uncertainty about what that next level is going to look like. I've heard parents in focus groups tell me all the time, I really don't know much about the high school. And they're going to be led by what they know or don't know. And if they know more about some other experience in the community, they may be led in that direction. So it's important, though, is that we strengthen that confidence in that transition. So where we're going to reassure them, again, it's instilling that confidence in them that as we've prepared your child so far, we're going to continue to do that. And here's how we're going to do this at the next level. And so that early clarity is going to help to stabilize retention. I mean, if you're just now implementing transition grade strategies, hoping that that's going to have an effect on re-enrollment for next year, you're too late in the process. If you're looking at 8th and 9th grade as an issue, you need to look at that in 6th grade. What are you going to do in 6th grade? What are you going to do in 7th grade? What are you going to do in 8th grade to provide that reassurance and confidence to the families that their child can continue to excel? This is what we're going to offer them, and we hope that they're part of our community moving forward. We're going to skip this poll, but it's something for you to ask on your own. How confident that you're focused in on the right retention priorities. It's important to have that assessment to understand where you're at. So maybe you're totally confident, you're doing all the right things, but maybe there's a question there, or you're not sure, or not feeling very confident. And so that's where you can take a look at all these different priorities that you can consider for your retention strategy, because you want to reduce attrition. So here's some leadership levers that can stop attrition. And maybe that's overstated, because none of these specific levers can just stop attrition from happening, but they can have a positive effect on them, on attrition. And that's where you want to be involved in trying to pull these specific levers. So parents' confidence monitoring. I've talked about parents' confidence, early on and throughout this presentation. That's how the parents are feeling about, their future. Are they trusting you? Do they believe in what you're offering, that's going to affect, hopefully, their decision to stay? And so you can monitor parent confidence in things like a regular satisfaction survey. And so it could be, maybe some checks that you're doing throughout the year. So I typically recommend that you do a Net Promoter Score survey in late fall, and then a comprehensive satisfaction survey in the spring. That at least gives you 2 touch points to understand where parents are at in their overall perspectives of the school. Also, your Net Promoter Score, measure that a couple times during the year to understand the strength of your school's word of mouth. Reviewing trends and concerns. What are you hearing? What are you seeing as you're interacting with parents, as you're out and about having conversations and connections? What's the word out on the street? Has the parking lot mafia taken over? I just heard this in a school recently, where they had an issue, and the parking lot mafia was taking over and dealing with some concerns and issues. And so they gathered their group, and were dealing with some concerns that they had within the school. So how are you monitoring what's going on? So I was surprised to me that I run into schools that don't have a regular system in place, don't have a regular flow of collecting that feedback. And so you have to have that. I'm a huge proponent. I offer surveys to schools, and you can do this in other places as well. But I design surveys and I conduct them for you, provide you with the results. I include it in my Enrollment Catalyst program, where I design customized surveys like the ones I talked about earlier. How many of you are surveying families within the middle school, like I talked about, parents and students, to be able to assess their perspectives on continuing for high school in your school, and to do that early on. Lever number 2 is it's really about the everyday experience. It's kind of a no-brainer. We've been talking about this. This is where the leadership steps in and looks at the everyday experience, because you want to have that alignment, to have the standards and the accountability and the approach across the board from early childhood all the way. And not only in our programs, but also alignment and how we feel about the next level. I was in a school recently, and I had a group of middle school faculty in a focus group meeting, and we were talking about how do they feel about the high school, and they said we feel somewhat disconnected. We feel like they're a totally different group than we are. Do we promote them? Not necessarily. We're busy in our area, so there seemed to be a disconnect, and if they're not aligned, that's going to show in the day-to-day experience in middle school for promoting what's happening and their desire to continue. Communication standards, consistent responsiveness, these are all different ways that we can look at those everyday experiences. Again, retention goes to every single day. It's back to the Tuesday test that we talked about earlier. That's the true sign of where families are going to feel that confidence within your school. The transition grade focus. Typically, in my experience in schools, you're going to lose families at those key transition grade points because those are kind of built-in stages within our school community where but they're maybe going to look at something else. You know, especially as the child gets older, they're going to have more influence in that decision. It's interesting what I found in these schools that I've done these surveys is that the students aren't making the decision alone. They're actually making it along with the parents as they look at high school, but they're going to have influence. So you need that earlier engagement in transition grades. If, you know, maybe this is one key takeaway is that you can't wait to, you know, the middle of the 5th grade year to talk about the transition to middle school. What are you going to do up before that? Maybe 2 or 3 years. You know, are you going to have a series of events and activities that expose those upper elementary school students to the middle school? How are you going to get your parents involved? How are you going to reinforce the messages and stories about students and families that have stayed into that middle school and how they found that this has been the foundation that they've loved and enjoyed? I mean, that's really what it's about. So it's more than just having a parent meeting, but it's actually about a series of intentional strategies that we're working on with transition grade. A few years ago, I worked with Mount Perrin Christian, and they had in place their Encounter Week program, which is designed to focus in on that transition between 8th and 9th grade. And it was geared to focus in on the student and their influence in that decision. So they had designed an entire week of experiences, included a teacher flip day where the 9th grade teachers came down to the 8th grade and taught the students. They had a big rally, they had a football game, a tailgate party, a big worship service, a t-shirt, a food truck, a lot of great activities. They did that in late October, early November, and that was part of their strategy. You know, one of the things that they were doing. You need to articulate the value. You need to increase your visibility. Certainly, you know, to make, for example, to make the high school faculty present with the middle school. What if that middle school student was influenced by a high school faculty member that encouraged them to come on to high school? I can hardly wait to have you in my class. That's going to go a long way. And so if we can think about those different types of focal points for us with those transition grades, the leadership visibility and response, you know, do we have leaders who are accessible? I remember years ago working with a head of school, and he never came out of his office. He was focused in on reports and details, not relationships. And so I believe that a leader has to be relationship driven. Certainly we have those details and strategies and plans, but we have to get out of our office and connect with people, be visible, you know, to be seen in the morning or seen in the hallways, in the classes. We have to know and communicate what happens with escalation when that occurs, you know, so that parents know who to contact. Who do they go to? I've been in so many schools where parents don't know who to call, and then to have timely follow-up. I think we're even past the point where it's 24-hour response. We really have to respond on the same day. Doesn't mean that we have to provide that answer that day, but we need to respond and say, hey, I appreciate your message. I know you have this concern. Because of my schedule today, I can't get back to you until tomorrow. Could we set up a time to be able to talk? That's going to defuse the situation. Silence is going to escalate it. So number 5 is prioritization. So we can't do everything. So we need to understand the priorities that we want to focus in on. Maybe there's one main transition point, for example, that we need to zero in on. What can we do on a comprehensive basis? This is where I've helped some schools think about that transition between 8th and 9th grade and build a program in place over several years leading up to that. Or maybe it's, you know, saying no, you know, protect stability when confidence is most fragile. Recently I was working with a school, and they've had some retention challenges and leadership turnover, and you know, they were recommending a significant tuition increase. And so the problem with that is that you're implementing a significant change when the community is the most fragile from the challenges that they've been through, and that's going to continue to affect attrition within their school community. So you have to think about the prioritization and put in place the reality check, you know, identifying parent confidence. You know, are parents truly confident in what you're doing? Confident in what you're doing? Is your everyday experience reliable and aligned? Is the leadership visible? What are you doing in your transition grades to try to deal with those vulnerable transition points and being proactive? So this is a reality check that your leadership team could spend some time on. And think about your own leadership commitments, and because we're all leaders within our school. So what are some things that we need to maybe start or stop or do differently? Maybe I need to be more intentional about connecting with parents. I get so consumed with all the details on my schedule that I need to step out of my office and just have those casual conversations. What do I need to improve upon? What do I need to strengthen, within my particular area as a leader within the school community? A couple final takeaways as our time comes to an end here is that retention doesn't improve because schools try harder. It's really going to improve because we, as leaders, focus on the experiences that matter most. And that's truly the everyday experience within our school community. And the number 2 takeaway is you don't have a retention problem. It's more of a parent confidence problem. And that, to me, is a key takeaway from this time that we've been together. We need to focus in on the parent confidence. And we need to think about how we can reinforce their confidence in what we're doing. Are they confident in the day-to-day operations? Are they confident in the faculty and staff that we're hiring and retaining? Are they confident in the programs? Are they confident in the opportunities that our school is providing for their child to excel at the next level? And keep going down the list. Are parents confident in what you're offering? Because if they're not, that's where you typically will lose families. They may use tuition as a smokescreen, just like I wrote about in my recent blog post. But it's truly rooted in other issues. They lack confidence within your school, within your community. So hopefully this has encouraged some of your thinking as we think about stopping attrition. We need to start leading. There's no easy solution. There's no magic wand. I think I probably need a follow-up webinar to this that will talk about some of those strategies that I was rattling off, because those strategies are important. But this whole leadership component is critical to stopping attrition. Don't forget about some of the upcoming show and tell shows. You'll be getting information on this if you follow me through my newsletter. And so it's a great way to be able to tune in, and hope to see you online there. And if there's a way that I can help you, I'd love to connect. And so I work with schools all the time, whether it's traveling to your school or working remotely or providing coaching or doing surveys, whatever it may be. That's what I do day in and day out. And I would love to help you with your enrollment and marketing needs along the way. So I haven't checked the questions, but it looks like there may be a few here. So let's just see what is going on with any questions that I might be able to answer. It looks like some of these are just comments reinforcing what I was sharing along the way. So if you do have any questions that I can help you with, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm glad to interact with you and help you in any way that I can. So thank you so much for joining me in this webinar today. And I look forward to seeing you on a future webinar down the road. Thank you.